get proof of UFOs? You're kind of going out in remote areas and stuff like that to try filming them and taking pictures. And aren't you ever scared that you might actually run into one close up or something like that? What would you actually do, Michael?
Funny you should mention that, Gary, is that we have a couple, we have about 12 members of the UFO I-team, but we have a few intuitives in our group who literally get physical reactions, they say, when there is something close at hand that we are going to uncover or witness. And we can go out pretty much any night of the week with our sophisticated gear. We've got night vision cameras, we've got the infrared, and we've got stop-action photography, and we can pretty much guarantee we're going to find something anomalous in the sky. But Lee Strauss, one of our cameramen, says that when he gets a premonition that a sighting is about ready to be recorded on our gear, he gets what he calls the heebie-jeebies, something that he tells him that something is afoot. So at least I know I've got a couple people in our group that will be able to give us some warning ahead of time.
Well,
something like that.
I mean, I'm going to ask you a real dumb question. What happens if one is like 100 feet above your head or decides to land out in that field, in that farm? I mean, you're out looking for it, and sometimes when you go out looking for it, you find things you don't want to find. So I'm just kind of curious, what would you do? I know myself, I'm a coward, I don't mind looking at them, with a pair of infrared binoculars or a telescope. That's one thing. But, to actually, have one get really close. I mean, ever since I had that experience in that desert, where we were driving and all of a sudden it looked like daylight all around the car and it lit up inside the car when it was pitch black. And then I pull over thinking maybe it was a helicopter, highway patrol or whatever, I'm in trouble. Because, I think the speed limit was around 100 or something like that, crazy at that time frame. And when I pulled out there and got out of the car, it was really bright for a split second or 2 seconds or 3. I don't know what the time was. But I'll tell you, it hurt my eyes. It was bright, but then it was instantly gone. And I was telling Peter Davenport about that, and he said he's got a lot of reports of the same type of situation. And I'll tell you, that whole night in the car driving, heading towards Seattle, I was really scared. And my wife at the time, Julie, was sitting there, looking at the sky steady all the way home, not wanting to, the first thing in our mind is it was a UFO. But you can take you're in the car, and after you have that type of situation, it makes you nervous. At least it did me, and I think it would a lot of people.
Oh, yeah. Well, that you know, in my time as a MUFON investigator, I've heard several stories that have real strong similarities to what you're describing, just in terms of the unusual light that seems to appear out of nowhere, and it turns on and off so quickly, it's not even real. I'm not even really describing it very well, but I've heard things similar to what you're describing before.
Yeah, and I've never seen anything like that afterwards. And, I've been interested in well, it's one of the things that actually really started my paranormal thing was pretty much that. And then after that, I ran into a couple other things in my life that I wish I wouldn't have. But, I mean, I really, strongly believe that we're being visited. And I don't know. It's just how some people look at it. At least you can say it now. And most people won't look at you like a crackpot. I won't say that. I still say if you talk about Bigfoot, you kind of get looked at strange. But I mean, UFOs, it's so much of it. And in so many reports, like in Brazil, I was listening to an old Art Bell show a couple months ago where a South African general, responded with his helicopter special forces group to a crashed UFO. And he explained that the U.S. government, they weren't allowed to do anything. They tried cutting it open at one point, he said. And then he got direct orders above not to do anything. And all of a sudden, Americans arrived and they removed the UFO. And then all of a sudden, he was no longer a general and he was no longer in the military of South Africa.
Whoa.
But I mean, that was interesting, and I did check it out on the, the web, and it was a legitimate general by that name and all that stuff. So I mean, I don't know. There, and if you go like in Brazil, or if you go into a lot of countries like Russia, they announce when they see UFOs. They tell the public, there's UFOs and the sightings. They don't sit there and say, "Oh, it's fake."
Yeah. Well, a lot of people are more enlightened than we are. What can you say? I wanted to just quickly tell a story that related to something that came up just a couple of minutes ago. We were talking about, Michael, you were talking about the folks in your group who have these intuitions or sort of premonitions of that something might happen. Is that a fair way to describe it?
Yeah, exactly. We've got at least one mystic. We've got a couple of intuitives, and we have a certified hypnotherapist as well that kind of gives us those feedbacks.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, it reminded me of one of the last cases that I investigated for MUFON. It was a young couple. They had seen something in broad daylight that kind of terrified them, and they just a bright object in the sky. They reported it to MUFON. They lived close enough to me that I was actually able to go meet with them at their house and interview them in person. You can't always do that because of distance. So I met with this couple, and they described everything they saw, and I had to tell them, I think what you saw was a sundog. The weather conditions that day were such that they may very well have been what you saw. And they were very accepting of that. And they were like, it's kind of disappointing. We thought it was something more than that, but they were, I was able to explain my reasoning to them, and they accepted that, and they thought, well, yeah, that certainly makes sense. So that case was just kind of, didn't really go anywhere. But a day or two later, the woman from this couple emailed me, and she said, ever since we talked to you about that sighting we thought we had, she said, I've been having memories of these weird dreams I had as a kid, and I think, could we do an interview sometime so I can tell you about these experiences? So a couple days later, I got together with her, and she was telling me this. It's a long story. I can't go into it now, I don't think, but she had a history of childhood nightmares that involved some sorts of alien beings, and her entire kindergarten class being sort of marked or identified in strange ways. They were really, really creepy, scary stories. But after hearing these stories, we both kind of commented on, it's kind of interesting that she and her husband's first sighting that actually didn't amount to anything actually triggered these memories in her. And it was kind of this weird situation where it seemed like the reason that she and her husband reported that sundog was so that she could remember these dreams she had when she was younger. Do you follow what I'm saying? It was just kind of this weird cause and effect thing where, like, they had to see that the UFO report that didn't amount to anything in order to make contact with me so that this woman could share her story with me. It was a really interesting situation, and what made it even weirder was that I've talked with other UFO witnesses, actually young women about the same age, who've had really similar experiences in dreams. So that was one that I'm still scratching my head over a lot.
Well, how many reports did you get, like women claiming that they were abducted, sexually assaulted by their alien abductor?
I never came across anywhere there was sexual assault involved. But I would say, I never kept count or anything. I wouldn't say it was a 50-50 split between men and women. But at least 40% of the witnesses that I interviewed were women. So, it's a universal experience. And that reminds me of something I wanted to comment on before when you were talking before about the person from South America, and how this is a global phenomenon. That was another thing that Hynek always made a point of mentioning when he was talking about how believable this all is. Hynek would say, look, people from all over the world are reporting seeing things in the sky, right? Why is it that all these people, no matter where they live in the world, they're all reporting the same things in the sky? They're always saucer-shaped or cigar-shaped or orb-shaped. Why aren't there squares and cubes and triangles? Well, now there are triangles, of course, but back when Hynek was, involved in this, I don't think triangles really existed. That's really a fairly modern phenomenon in ufology. But Hynek's point, I think, was a pretty strong point. How is it that all these people all over the world are seeing basically the same things in the sky? Wouldn't you expect it to be a huge, wide variety of different things that people are seeing? And yet it's always the same basic shapes. I find things like that very, very convincing.
Well, I find if you go back to prehistoric dates and you look in the caves and then you start seeing drawings, right, of a man with a helmet on riding on some type of thing, in the sky, it tells me, hey, we probably were visited. They seen it, and that's how they recorded it. So, I mean, you just can't say, oh, this started in the 40s or the 30s. This has been going on for, as long as man has been here.
Yeah, it's very deep-seated. I don't think anybody can deny that. It's very, very deep-seated, and I don't think it'll ever go away. The problem is, will we ever understand it? That's where I'm at now after all this time, writing my blog and writing my book and, doing my years as an investigator for MUFON. I always end up, I'm not sure if we can ever understand what they are, but I've gotten so interested in trying to understand what they mean. And I think we might have a better chance of figuring that out, what they mean, over what they are. I don't know if we'll ever really understand what they are, but I think what they mean to all of us is something to really think about. That's kind of where my head goes. Is this phenomenon preparing us for something? Is it expanding our consciousness in some way that we don't even understand? And those are some of the concepts that Dr. Hynek played with later in his life too. When in the later years of his career, and he studied UFOs right up until his dying day. He never retired from the UFO business at all. But towards the end of his life, his thinking was more and more about parallel dimensions. He was wondering, well, what if these things don't come from another planet? What if they're from right here? What if they're from a parallel dimension right next to ours right now? Maybe they're a lot closer than we think they are.
That is a very good possibility too.
I know. And so instead of referring to extraterrestrials, he would refer to, I think he called them meta-terrestrials, which is a great word and should probably be used more often. I should try to use that word more often. Meta-terrestrials is what he thought of them.
Now, we only got about 3 minutes left. I would like to have you come back on maybe in about another month, and we can, get into it a little bit more. Or even maybe Michael would, maybe like to have you on his Sunday show talking about it. I mean, I love, honestly, when I get somebody in, it knows a lot about, the subject, especially since you also did a lot of investigating. I mean, there's got to be some interesting stories, a lot of them.
I think Mark and I could go on for hours. I would love to have him on my show.
I'd love to. Whichever show you guys flip a coin, I don't care. I'll be happy to talk with either one of you anytime. Like I told you at the beginning, you get me started talking about this, it's hard to shut me up.
Well, how can people find your book and, give us that information? And are you working on a sequel to that book?
No, I'm not working on a sequel. Actually, I have some other projects that have been taking up my time, and I can't really talk about them, unfortunately. But I do, in the back of my mind, I do think it would be fun to do a follow-up book to this one. I'm just not totally sure what it would be. But for the book that I do have out now, It's called The Close Encounters Man,